He built exactly what he was supposed to build. Good job. Stable home. Kids who turned out okay. A reputation at work for being the guy who handles things. A life that, if you drew it on paper, looks like the answer to every question he was supposed to be asking. And somewhere around 51, something started feeling off. Not broken, not wrong exactly, just slightly too quiet. Like a room where all the furniture is in the right place and nobody wants to be in it. He didn't tell anyone. That's not how he operates. He made a mental note, moved on, and went back to being reliable. That's the thing about Gen X men. They don't fall apart. They're not built for that. They were raised in a specific kind of way: early independence, high self-reliance, low tolerance for their own complaints. And that wiring runs deep. So when something starts going wrong internally, they don't sound the alarm. They file it away. They manage it. They keep moving. The problem is that this same instinct, the one that made them so good at handling everything, is exactly what makes a particular kind of invisible stagnation so easy to miss. Not failure, not crisis, something quieter than that. A slow drift past the life they actually wanted, done so efficiently, so competently, that it barely made a sound. This is about the psychology behind that drift. Why it happens to this specific type of man, and why the men it happens to are almost always the last ones to see it. There's a specific way this happens, and it doesn't look like what most people imagine when they hear the word stagnation. It's not the man who gave up, not the one who drinks too much or never left his hometown or talks endlessly about what he could have been. That version is visible. You can point at it, name it. This is something else entirely. This is the man who did everything right, who showed up, adapted, delivered, who built a career not out of passion necessarily, but out of competence, and found that competence was enough to keep going for a very long time, decades even. Until one day, it quietly wasn't. Gen X men were shaped by a particular set of conditions. Most of them grew up in homes where nobody was hovering. Divorce rates peaked just as they were hitting their early teens. Both parents working wasn't unusual. It was just Tuesday. They came home to empty houses, figured out the afternoon alone, and internalized something that would follow them for the rest of their lives. You handle it yourself. You don't make it a bigger deal than it is, and you keep moving. That's not a trauma story. For most of them, it didn't feel like one. It just felt like how things worked. And the self-reliance it built was real, genuinely useful, genuinely earned. The problem isn't that they became self-sufficient. The problem is what self-sufficiency starts to do when it has no off switch. When you spend enough years being the person who handles things, handling things stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The identity locks in, and once it locks in, it starts making decisions for you. Quietly, automatically, without asking. You don't stop to ask whether this job is still right for you. You handle it. You don't sit with the discomfort of a marriage that's become more logistical than emotional. You manage it. You don't examine the vague restlessness that shows up on Sunday evenings. You push through it and start the week. None of this feels like stagnation from the inside. It feels like being responsible, reliable, adult. It feels like exactly what you're supposed to do, and that's the trap. Because there's a version of being okay that is actually very far from okay. And it's the version that looks, from every external angle, completely fine. The bills are paid. The relationships are functional. The performance reviews are solid. Nothing is wrong. And something is deeply, quietly wrong. Psychologists who study midlife transitions in men, particularly men with high self-reliance and low help-seeking behavior, describe a pattern they call identity foreclosure. It's what happens when a man commits so early and so completely to a particular version of himself that he never develops the habit of questioning it. He just runs the program, year after year, until the program is all there is. For Gen X men, this isn't a glitch. It's almost a feature of how they were built. The generation that never needed anyone to validate them also never developed the habit of checking in with themselves. They were too busy being competent. And competence, this is the part that doesn't get said enough, competence is one of the most effective ways to avoid your own life. Because when you're competent, you can always find something to optimize, something to fix, improve, manage, execute. The to-do list never empties. The responsibilities never run out. And as long as you're moving, as long as there's something to handle, it's very easy to mistake motion for direction. This is what the drift actually looks like up close. Not a man lying on the couch doing nothing. A man who is extraordinarily busy, highly functional, respected by the people around him, and operating on a path he chose or inherited at 28 and hasn't genuinely examined since. Think about the decisions that shape a life. Career direction, where you live, who you're with, what you spend your energy on. Most of those decisions were made in your 20s and early 30s, made by a version of you that was younger, less informed, operating under different pressures, family expectations, financial necessity, what success was supposed to look like in 1997. The man you are at 52 is running a life that was largely architected by the man you were at 29. And if you never stopped to renegotiate that, if you were too busy being reliable to ever ask whether the whole structure still fits, then you're not living your life. You're maintaining someone else's blueprint. That's the thing that tends to surface in quiet moments. Not loudly, not in a way that demands attention. It comes up on a long drive somewhere, a night when the house is empty and the usual noise isn't there to cover it. A moment of stillness that catches you off guard and sits with you a second too long. Gen X men don't talk about these moments. That's not how they process things. Or more accurately, it's not how they were trained to process things. The instinct is to note it, file it, get back to what needs to be done. Which works. Until it doesn't. Until the feeling stops going away when you file it and starts waiting for you every time the noise settles down. This is the part that's worth understanding clearly, because it explains why the drift goes undetected for so long. Gen X men are, on average, significantly less likely to seek help, therapeutic, medical, or otherwise, than any adjacent generation. Not because they're stubborn, exactly. Because asking for help requires first admitting that something is wrong, and men who were raised to handle things have a very high threshold for what counts as wrong. A crisis counts, a breakdown counts. A vague, persistent sense that your life has drifted slightly sideways from where it was supposed to go. That doesn't count. That's just being an adult. That's just how it is. Except it's not just how it is. And somewhere in the back of the mind, behind the competence, behind the routine, behind the very full calendar, most of these men already know that. The years aren't gone, they're just unclaimed. And the same instinct that made you good at handling everything else, that quiet, stubborn competence, is exactly what you'll need to handle this. The only difference is that this time you actually have to notice it first.